I'd like to welcome everybody to the Jewish Art Salon Open Studios program. It's great to see you all. Our fearless leader, Yona Verwer, who is the director of the Jewish Art Salon, normally opens these programs, but she's out in the field embellishing an interior and making Manhattan beautiful. So Yona, I don't know if you're if you're listening, but if you are, hello to you. This is a program which is offered once or twice a month, and we will continue doing this through the spring of 2021. And all the participants are Jewish Art Salon members who have either submitted their work to a jury or been invited. And this morning, we're very pleased to present Audrey Anastasi, Alan Lux, and Joan Shrager. And our artists today comment on the human condition. They use the human figure and habitat to frame and convey their views on gender roles, the political climate, and relationships. And Dorit, please introduce our first artist.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. The works presented today express the artist's emotions of the isolation and the social distancing. The digital images are layered and the figurative appears between the sharp colors. Audrey Frank Anastasi is a politic feminist artist working in painting, drawing, collage, mixed media, and printmaking. She's also curator, gallerist, educator, and art advocate. Most of Anastasi's figurative works are painted with her non-dominant left hand. Other subjects include refugees, birds, animals, and trees. Over the course of her career, she has had 20 solo and 200 group shows. Her Refugee series will be shown at Medgar Evers College and the Valentine Museum of Art in Brooklyn, New York. Anastasi's collage series was recently exhibited at Valancourt Gallery, Brooklyn. In 2018, 10 paintings were exhibited in Painting to Survive, curated by Yale critic Jonathan Weinberg. Go ahead, unmute yourself, Audrey, and we're waiting to hear you.
Hi there. Thank you very, very much for that introduction. And thank you to the Jewish Art Salon for inviting me to be a part of your program. And thank you to all of you who are here to listen and be a part of this forum. I will touch on a number of the things that you had mentioned in the introduction. I'm going to share my screen right now. So here I am at work on a painting and collage. And the first thing I'm going to show you is a video, a time lapse. So, there we go. Okay. So COVID comes along and none of us know what we're doing. We don't know whether we can go outside and breathe the air. And my concern was, well, I want to be able to work. So I did a remote session with the model. Her name is Sage Sovereign. You'll see her pop up in different works. And I had her on Zoom, and this is a 30-second image of, or video of working remotely. And so that was one thing that I'd always wanted to do, a time lapse. And so this, whoops, can I go to my next slide? Yes, so through all the angst and self-evaluation that COVID thrust upon us artists, that was a good thing in the sense of I always wanted to learn how to do a time lapse, and there it was. So that was my first one. The other thing is I love working large, but because I was going to be setting up a little home studio, I thought, well, let me concentrate on the collages. These are very engaging works for me, and in the process. And so this is an example. This is one I call Creation. I used the hands from the Michelangelo Sistine Chapel, the Creation of Adam. And I used it in this case almost as clavicles, as collarbones. I thought that the size kind of the paper that I had, of the reproduction that I had, mimicked that and worked very well. And that's where this started. And then from there, I kind of took off and used that theme of creation. So as I mentioned, I went to my studio, I took a handful of figure drawings. So I'm going to show you what this came from, where this was born, so to speak. That's the figure drawing that I started with. And throughout my career, I've continued to work with figure drawings, with portraits. And then, as I said, this is what happens when my collage process is to use the torn, ripped paper, maps, other old drawings as paint strokes more than juxtaposed narratives. A lot of times in collages, you'll see things like switching out an eye or a limb. And I like to use the torn paper more like one would use paint. So this is one of the first collages that I did in isolation, so to speak. And the figure drawing kind of lent to feeling rained upon, sort of this drenched sensation. And you can see, I don't know if you see my cursor at all, but you can see that I like to follow the character of the anatomy. I love that physicality. And these are a little closer, and one of the sources that I like is National Geographic. You get wonderful things like the, on the right near the top, you see a fossil, and towards where the buttocks would be, you see a cave painting. And I thought that that kind of lent to that constriction that many of us were feeling. On a slightly more hopeful note, we have a sleeping figure being touched by some kind of visitation angel. And it's a very tender kind of connection there at the middle of the piece. And you also see all kinds of kind of celestial forms. In this one, I'm definitely a child of Eastern European descent. My heritage personally, and my education is in the art history that we think of in the Eastern tradition. I'm sorry, the European tradition, I should say. And so one of my favorite artists was Vermeer. And so when I found an article with all these wonderful Vermeer illustrations, it was kind of a natural to use it with this very serene looking woman. And here, not only am I using the torn paper as swaths of color, but in the close-up, you can see that the actual his images became a little more important and a little more dominant and repeated. So in the face, you see Vermeer's painted face within the face that I had painted. This is a piece that's called Library, just because that's what it looked like to me. And if you turn your head sideways, you can see that a lot of what surrounds the central figures was actually a room that was turned on its side for this piece. This is called Huntress, and again, hearkening to more contemporary art, we've got some Basquiat worked into the figure and into the, I don't want to call it embellishment like it's frivolous, but in sense of developing the imagery. This one I call Fierce Dancer. I loved the images that I had seen in a flyer about dance, the high drama of that. And again, this also harkens to the art history that I'm most familiar with. We've got Da Vinci looking on, we've got Botticelli forming the shape of the shoulder. And I call this one Botticelli Brunette. I like using maps. I love working with the random and the controlled in the collage. That's important to me. And this one I call Easter Flowers. And if we have time later, I'll read a little quote about collages in general. So now going back to my practice and kind of how I got to those collages, I love working from life. On the right, you see, again, the same model, Sage. And she's a fire breather, by the way. So she comes with a sense of drama, and it's always wonderful to work with her. And so she has become a muse of a sort because of that. And I was invited into a show called Disillusionment, and I spoke to her about it, and she came to my studio with this kind of see-through fabric. And on the right is a Sage next to the painting part that I had done while she was there. That's a direct painting done in probably 3 hours on a 7-foot tall panel. And then on the left, you see the entire panel, and the painting then has incorporated these shards of rain or sort of an interference. And those are pieces of the New York Times arts section kind of coming down on this person. And you don't know if she's trying to protect herself or if she's trying to get out. So I like when the figure work has that sense of being somewhat enigmatic. Okay, so now another big project that unfortunately got postponed due to the virus is my refugee project. And these are works that are very, have a lot of empathy. They're created out of empathy. They're not created from reference materials. So although most of my work is observational, this was developed trying to feel what it must be like to have to leave your home to protect your family. There's a book which has been postponed and an exhibition. And here's a picture of the installation of half of it. Because there's 180 images. I used the multiplier of 18 because it felt like the right thing on these small images, which I'll show you in a moment. And then there are a couple of large panels shown here. And this is at the Valentine Museum of Art, which is a private collection in Brooklyn. And I'll put their name up a little later on. So what I'm showing you here is what I painted this series on. This is a passport photo protector. It's the same size as a passport. There's 2 sides to it, and they're printed with these suggestions for travel. And I liked using the randomness to show through on the images. These are 2 examples of verticals, and they're heavily laden boats. There are people escaping by boat. And again, this is not a particular photo reference usage, but I just kind of imagined from the multiple images that we would see on TV and in the newspapers. And so there's images of many, many people, the tents, multitudes of people, sometimes dark because they're nameless and they're faceless in this situation. Repeated themes are fences, again, water, that sort of sense of being desperate, trying to somehow survive this treacherous journey, children, more tents, more multitudes of people, the discomfort, the fear of being cold, wet in the water. And this is me in the studio working on one of the large ones. So, and that again will be on the website, and at some point there'll be an opening and the book will be published. And so it's a very, very exciting project for me, and it's unfortunate that it got postponed. So some of that came out of an earlier series I had done, the idea of working purely instinctively, not having a reference. And this is the Stations of the Cross. So for those of you who might not be familiar with it, whenever you go into a Catholic church, there are 14 specific occurrences between the time that Jesus was condemned over here on the upper left, down to when he's laid in the tomb on the right here near the bottom. And it's been a tradition throughout the years that every church would have the Stations of the Cross. They're used for meditation. People walk the stations. And I always wanted to do a series, and I tried to do this kind of from the place of empathy, of feeling what it must have been like to be mocked, to be tormented. And this is an example, so you can see what they look like. They're done, again, very, very quickly. These are done with my left hand and on a gold leaf panel with very, very, I call it humble black gesso. So they're very, very simply and quickly painted. And they became a book because after getting them out into the public, I kind of felt like people responded in a way that was very intimate, and I thought a book made sense for that. And so what's a nice Jewish girl doing, painting the Stations of the Cross? I just had to do it. But here I have something that goes back to the Old Testament, and this is my interpretation of Noah's Ark, the flood, the animals. And I didn't want to paint them as we often see them illustrated in happy little children's books. I wanted the rain to be driving and to, again, kind of feel that discomfort of the driving rain. And to me, that's kind of an ecological issue, our stewardship of our earth and our animals. And this is an example. Those were done in 2 sizes, and this is an example of how they can be displayed. This is about half of them. And I just took a quick picture so I could, and actually my fantasy for this is I would love to see these in a public installation at some point, maybe fabricated in a different way. So if I'm not going too long yet, this takes us back to my first love. I really love doing portraiture. I love the face and the figure. The image on the right with the man facing the dove is a right-handed painting. So it's done on a panel, and it was done from a photo reference. I took the photo and composed in the photograph, and then rather truthfully painted the painting. And it has a kind of spiritual character. The dove is symbolic in Judeo-Christian symbolism. And the painting on the left is Otto Niels. He's an artist, he's a sculptor, a painter, and this is from life, and this is painted in one session. And here's Otto standing next to me and the painting. This was done a few years ago. It's done on 2 panels, but as I said, it's done very intuitively. So the idea of starting to paint with my left hand was to circumvent too much self-editing, being too perfectionistic, and just trying to get to the heart and the soul of what I'm painting. And I feel like I reached a different connectivity with my subjects when I work with my left hand. And
Audrey, I'm just going to give you a time warning because we're a little over 12 minutes. So.
Oh, okay. Well, I can stop anytime, or I'll just zip through it real quickly.
Yeah,
Okay. So this is a model with a left-handed painting that also refers to the small right-handed painting that you had seen. This is Cindy Nemser, feminist art critic, and I projected the painting that Alice Neal had done of her when I did it, and there she is on the right sitting for the session. This is Ming Smith. She's a photographer. She was in the, I want to say this right, Kumangi group. This is another kind of domestic painting. This is myself with my mother, and I do have to say I originally was going to paint us both from life in the mirror. I call it psychodrama mama, because what happened was when I saw her sitting next to me and she folded her arms and I looked so little, I thought that had a big psychological impact of us always being somewhat intimidated by the parent figure. These are figures outside of a domestic setting, kind of set into space, and some installations. And then to finish up, we're back to creation. And hopefully my next step, I've gone to the studio and I sketched it out, and I'm going to see how the collage work will lead to another phase of the larger paintings. So thank you. I'm sorry for going over time, but I appreciate the opportunity to share this.
So, okay, so Audrey, you can stop share on your screen.
Aha, thank you.
Yes.
There it is.
And the chat is just full of accolades and compliments. I don't see any questions at this point. So I think because Audrey did go over, I'm just going to proceed.
Richard.
Oh, Richard, do you have a question? I see you waving your hand. Go ahead.
Sure. First of all, Audrey, thank you very much. Your work is certainly fascinating. One comment, and this certainly doesn't apply just to you, but when one uses highly recognizable and famous works of art or symbols, my experience has been that it stops the eye. And Michelangelo's hands or a Botticelli or a Vermeer, whatever, and it does something to the act of actually trying to relate to the work, and to me it stops it because you know it too well. The same thing, by the way, happens when people, we're curating a show right now on Genesis, right? And some people have included Shabbos candlesticks, right? 2 candlesticks with lights. These images stop things. They don't really have meaning anymore because they're like a stop sign. They don't, so that's just one observation on those particular elements, because it's interesting because your other work is so inventive and is so rich in your own images that here, in the ones that you were showing where you have famous things, it pulls, to me anyway, it pulls it down for what it's worth.
Well, now that's an interesting thing to hear. And I know that certain images are almost cliches in our culture, right. But I also feel, for me, I'm kind of using them as a touchstone and as a way to connect. But I hear what you're saying, and I appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, Vivian Abrams.
Oh, Vivian, go ahead and.
Hi, I would just like to make a quick comment. I'm an art therapist, and when you said about the idea of switching to your left hand, I loved it because very often when I'm working with patients and they're way too intellectual and they're not artists necessarily, I will often say, use your left hand because it kind of bypasses our intellect and editing and all that other stuff. So very powerful work. And I love the idea that you challenged yourself with making this part of had the insight. And thank you very, very much for your presentation.
Well, thank you very much for saying that. And that's exactly my motivation. So I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Audrey. It was wonderful. I have one question, and then I think we have to go further and keep the questions for later time if we're still gonna have time. So it's about the passports. First of all, please put your book link to people who wants to buy it on the chat. Maybe because it looks very interesting. The refugees were fantastic, and I wonder about the passports. Why did you choose to put a US passport? Usually the refugees are living without anything, any papers. And I wonder why is the US passport there?
Okay, so the practical answer is that's what I had. And these little cards are kind of plasticized. They, the paint moves around very smoothly on them. And the first series that I had done with them, I had used them for some birch works, and it almost read like the markings on birch trees. It's too long to go into, but it led to this being a good medium physically. But the other thing that you said is very important. And these are people that had to get up and go. They had to leave the comfort of their home and try to survive. And they don't have official papers. There's kind of an irony of using this passport substrate that is for people who are going to be traveling for pleasure or for business or for life. And these people who are depicted in the images are completely uprooted, homeless, trying to protect their families, trying to stay alive and safe and rebuild at some point. So thank you. That's really a good question. Thanks.
It's a really good presentation. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to mute out now. Thank you all.
All right, so we may have a little time at the end for questions, more questions for all the artists, but right now we're going to move on to Alan Lux, and I'm going to share my screen. Okay, Alan.
Okay, thank you very much. Hello, everyone, and thank you for allowing me to present today. I'm going to show some of my work that deals with the COVID-19 pandemic, politics, some religious themes, and some works that deal with stress and uncertainty in general. Now, the first image that you see shows two dinosaurs talking. And the first one says, "I'm not going to wear that damn mask. What's the worst that could happen to us?" So it has some sarcasm, some humor, and a lot of truth to it. This work was made at the beginning of the pandemic. And now, so many months later, I'm amazed how controversial face coverings still are. Instead of it being a scientific matter, it's taken a political matter, a political point of view, individual rights point of view. And I chose dinosaurs to have this discussion between themselves for obvious reasons. Hopefully, we all won't become extinct. This probably won't change many people's ideas or attitudes about masks, but I felt better when I finished it. Could I have the next one, please? Okay, this work is titled, "My main goal in life now is to survive until the next day, tomorrow." It represents, the title mainly represents anxiety and fear that some people have in just going about their daily activities. Going into a store or a doctor's office really shouldn't pose a fatal risk, but unfortunately right now it does. This was a pour painting, and since there are many ways to do pour paintings, I'll explain how I did it. I pour liquid acrylic paint slowly into a cup, layering it depending on the various colors I decide to use, and then slowly I pour the paint from the cup to the center of a blank canvas. After that, I tilt the canvas in various positions, thus the paint flows with gravity. So I can control what position on the canvas the paint goes to. I can control the color combination to some extent, but I can't really control much as far as the image is concerned. So after I finished this work, I thought the colors were really nice, but the next day when I took a picture of it and looked from a distance, I realized there was a face there. And you know, there's eyes, a nose, and sort of like a Buddy Hackett type mouth. I don't know if all of you remember what Buddy Hackett looked like, but he had this sort of crooked mouth. And I found that it was, you know, kind of unusual that all of these features on the face were actually in the correct position. And I hadn't attempted to paint the face. I was just trying to make an abstract picture. I had used red, yellows, white liquid acrylic paint. And it just happened sort of out of its own. And I was kind of surprised. The areas around the face that look like stringy areas are just the acrylic paint that was flowing and then sort of dried up as I was doing it. And some of them, you know, look like either hair or a beard, but it wasn't meant to occur. It was just also unintentional. Have the next one, please. Okay, this painting is obviously entitled "Stop," and it represents how COVID-19 has affected our lives. Although not everything has stopped, we all have things that we would like to do that we have to put off for the time being. COVID-19 has affected the whole world and the way we behave. It's sort of like a bad science fiction novel, but unfortunately it's nonfiction. A stop sign basically says, you know, to halt, usually our vehicle, sort of halts your car in its tracks. But after a few seconds, you can resume, the journey can continue. But we really don't know yet when our journey will continue with the COVID-19. There's a lot of uncertainty right now, obviously. Have the next image, please. Okay, this is obviously a go sign. And the previous painting of the stop sign was a little pessimistic. The go sign is sort of an optimistic representation. It represents the future, hopefully when our lives as we know it, as we knew it previously, will resume, when we can do all of the things that were put on hold during the pandemic. And later, if you want, you may want to message us and tell us about some of the things that you'll do as soon as the pandemic ends. I'd be interested in seeing, what you want to do. It might be simple things like just going to a restaurant and eating without fear, or seeing relatives, or going to a Broadway show. But it might be informative if later you just message us and tell us what you would do as soon as the pandemic, does finish. I decided to make the go sign with 8 sides, just like the stop sign is. And the sign is green, just like a green light where, you can go. And the surrounding red color tried to make the sign stand out more. Could I have the next image, please? Okay, this is titled Terezin. And as most of you know, Terezin was a ghetto and a concentration camp by the Nazis during World War II. It's about 1 hour outside of Prague in the Czech Republic. Terezin was used as a propaganda camp by the Nazis, sort of like a show camp. The International Red Cross had inspected it multiple times, and they were told by the Nazis that, the Jewish people were being treated well, and the Red Cross was either fooled or didn't want to know exactly what was really happening. But either way, nothing was really done to correct the situations that were occurring at Terezin. The center shows an exploding yellow Star of David, representing the attempt to destroy the Jewish people. And around the star, circling around the star, are some of the children's names who were shipped mainly to Auschwitz for extermination. On the left is a pink slip. When an inmate received a pink slip, it meant they were being shipped out, usually to Auschwitz-Birkenau. And obviously, that has a connotation going back in history as far as a pink slip is concerned. It may be difficult to see, but there's also a bumblebee in the picture. And this represents a character in an opera that the children of Terezin performed. There was a lot of symbolism in that play, and the main character was nicknamed the Bumblebee, and he's eventually driven away from the village because he was the bully of the town. And it's generally felt that the Bumblebee represented Hitler. The children's opera was even performed for the International Red Cross on one of their inspections on the camp. Now, there's also a Red Cross on the bottom right, which represents the International Red Cross. As I mentioned before, when the Red Cross came, they saw sham shops, newly painted buildings. And as I mentioned before, it was a show camp because the Nazis put on a temporary show to convince the Red Cross that all was well. And the propaganda did work. Approximately 150,000 people went through Terezin, and of the many children that were there, only 100 escaped death at the end of the war. During their captivity, the children made many pictures that did survive, although the youngsters didn't. And I included this image to remind us that, we may think we're going through difficult times right now, but everything is relative. And the stress that we're undergoing now really has to be compared to other events to put it into context. Could I have the next image, please? This is the Frank factory where Anne Frank and her family and others hid during World War II. It's viewed through a window from a room across the factory. And the buildings are sort of dark and forbearing. I made them, even darker than they are intentionally. And through the window, we can see the canal that the building is on, the brick walkways, and the actual buildings. I tried to convey the smoke coming out of the chimneys as fiery, to represent the incendiary situation that was occurring at that time. And again, stress and uncertainty are all relative things. And really what we're undergoing now has no comparison to the anxiety that those individuals felt while they were hiding in that annex. Could I have the next one, please? Okay. This work is called the Presidential Election 2020. And we see skeletons coming out of a closet in a frenzied manner. The presidential election of 2020 was definitely a stressful time. Both Democrats and Republicans, I think, can sort of interpret this image to fit their own narrative. So, you can interpret it from either angle. I tried to have your eyes drawn to the closet where all of the story is unfolding. You'll see that all of the lines lead to the closet. The door is bursting open and sort of chaos ensues. Uncertainty, confusion, and bedlam are all in red, white, and blue. It's a very simple message, but one that I enjoyed painting. Could I have the next one, please? This last work is called Modern Man or Talking Man. The image shows an individual with two mouths and one ear. The mouths are talking out of the sides of the face. This is talking out of both sides of your mouth to a higher level. When viewing the green jacket, you can see through him, and some of the background color is visible. You can definitely see through this individual. Most of us speak more than we listen, and this picture represents us all. Everyone really should try and listen more than we talk. Since he only has one ear, I put it on the top of his head to avoid asymmetry. And this painting represents many people in our society. Modern man has created a lot of uncertainty and stress in the world. And this situation has also encouraged many artists to produce works in response to the present events. Thank you for listening, and I appreciate your being here.
Thank you, Alan, so much. It was so interesting. And I haven't had a chance to look at the chat yet. So perhaps, Dorit, have you seen any questions there that we should let people ask?
Well, thank you so much, Alan, for your presentation. I really liked the Teresa, and it was very powerful. Was a little face there in the middle on the right side of the circle of the names. There was some little circle there. I couldn't see what it was. Is it a face?
On which painting was it?
It was on the Terezan with the yellow star split all over.
No, there was no face, no.
Was it the bee?
There was a small picture of a bumblebee, which was hard to see. So maybe it was the bumblebee.
Okay.
Very powerful. I really particularly like the Frank factory. That one really hit me emotionally. And I've been to Amsterdam and seen, excuse me, that scene, but you really brought the foreboding, as you said, and the ominous feeling about it.
Yeah, when I was there, it's always advertised as the Anne Frank house. But it really wasn't where they lived in real life. It was just the father's factory, which, that was something that I hadn't realized. It's really a factory and not, their house.
Yeah, and it's in sort of a commercial street. So that is a really good point. Well, I think we'll move on to Joan. Dorit.
Joan Shrager, you say it correctly, I hope, was formerly director of Art Forms Gallery in Munich. For 16 years, she has co-directed the stained glass project, Windows That Open Doors, with Paula Mendel, a volunteer after-school art program for Philadelphia public school students. Shrager also partnered with Rabbi Lance J. Sussman, PhD Senior Rabbi of Reform Congregation Knesset Israel, Elkin Park, Pennsylvania, creating 150 Jewish history PowerPoint presentations. She graduated with an MA from Temple University and trained at Maury and Taylor College of Art, Cheltenham Center for the Arts, University of the Arts, and Abington Art Center. For 55 years, she has exhibited in solo and group exhibitions. Her work is in the collections of Harcum College, University of Pennsylvania, Drexel University, and the Museum of Computer Art. Please show your presentation, Joan.
Well, first I'd like to say that I am both honored by being invited by the Jewish Art Salon and also for being paired with these two incredible artists that I just listened to. I'd like to talk a little bit about the magic of digital art because all of the work here is done directly on the computer, directly with Photoshop and other art apps. And I was thinking about a quote that might best express what's going on in my head during this time. And I found one by an American Trappist monk, Thomas Merton, who is also an author, a Catholic author. He says, art enables us to find ourselves and lose ourselves at the same time. And I think that's the story of my life since the pandemic. And I looked up the first image ever made on a computer of a human figure, which was done in the late 1950s on a $238 million military computer. I found that very intriguing. This is my equipment. I work on a desktop 27-inch iMac, having purchased in 1992 or 93, this little Apple. And that's where I got my start with the computer. Before I even knew about Photoshop, I was using the Apple software. This is the tablet I use, and this is called a stylus. And I use this to draw and paint with on my computer. This is my printer, and occasionally, sometimes I print my work onto canvas or watercolor paper, and then I paint on top of it. I'm going to start here. Maybe I should title it What to Do with All the Old Pictures. I lived with my grandparents and my parents, and I probably have about 1,000 old pictures. This was for an exhibition at Temple Judea in Elkins Park, Pennsylvania at Knesset Israel Synagogue. And I'm starting with this because it shows you kind of the breakdown of what I used for this painting, which I'll show you. My grandmother did a lot of stitchery, and I have all of it. And so I incorporated it into lots of works that I did about her and about my family. And these are photographs of my family. So this is my granny. I grew up with her, and she's always in my head, as is my mother. Again, I use her beautiful face, and I incorporate that with her stitchery, her hand crocheting and needlework. Again, I use her image, this time with my mother and with myself, and a photograph I took of a tree in a local park. Again, I use my grandmother, combining this for two silk hangings. This happens to be a photograph of her in probably 1908, 1909 in a shirtwaist factory in New York. And then we move on to little me in Atlantic City with the boardwalk over top and the ocean. And in that ocean is the ship that my grandmother came to America on. I actually found her name on their list of passengers. And this is the collection of family photographs, my grandparents holding me in Atlantic City, wearing their Atlantic City period bathing attire. So again, this is what I've done. Now we move on to my son. This is my oldest son, Steve, wearing a hat that he purchased while he visited in Moscow in the 80s. And this is my grandmother's father, He's also wearing that hat, not the same one, but a similar hat. And he's actually living in Russia at the time this picture is taken, probably in about 1905. And this is the family. And then just to show you, I incorporated a postcard from Russia, a picture of my grandfather's hometown, Berdichev, and family photographs. And again, this is a collection of family photographs. This is my youngest grandson, and I'm holding him. This is my grandfather holding his baby, me, his granddaughter. And this is my grandparents' photograph. This is kind of the earlier version, and then through the wonders of Photoshop, I created that. And again, you see what I included. Now we move on to another family photograph of all of us dancing. Me, my mother, my grandmother, my mother at the University of Pennsylvania in a dance group when she was a girl before she graduated. And all of these images in the back are documents from our family history. My grandfather's naturalization certificate, my Jewish marriage certificate, my grandfather's membership in the Jewish Y. It's kind of a way to remember everything. And I call it Freilach. In my house, we spoke Yiddish, except when my grandmother got angry at my grandfather for speaking Yiddish because her American grandchild was in the room and she wanted him to only speak English. And now the wedding. My mother's, my grandmother and grandfather's. This is my father, mine, my son's. And there I've incorporated in the background and running through it, all of these wonderful documents, including, and I also included the lace that I beaded for my wedding gown. And that's buried all over the background. This is the bar mitzvah. This is my father. And my sons are here. And my father is in Israel with a talit. We're not a religious family, incidentally. My grandfather was probably the closest to Karl Marx as you could possibly be. And Yiddish was spoken in the family. We didn't even do much for Hanukkah. We actually had Christmas decorations, never tree, but we didn't keep kosher. But I always find it ironic that my grandfather's beloved brother that he was extremely close to is the gentleman in the back, all attired as a cantor, having trained with Yessela Rosenblatt. And then he had a brother who served pork. And again, these are all the images that I incorporated. This is my Uncle Jack. Now we move on. During the pandemic, I began to work with Rabbi Sussman on interpreting the Parshas of the Torah. I didn't get farther than about 8. This is the beginning, and I'm sorry to upset the gentleman that was critical about using imagery that is used by other artists, but I have to plead guilty a lot. If you'll notice this imagery from the Sistine Chapel, it's here in my piece. You see it's here and it's here. Do you see it?
Yeah.
Okay. Everybody. Okay, and I did another one also incorporating imagery from other famous works of art. And I think it's just an incredible thing that you can take these images, put them on your computer, and have them come out any color you want, any shape you want, and have them layered. To me, I still marvel at it all. This is something I did for the synagogue for the Rosh Hashanah holidays and other images. We have an incredible museum at Knesset Israel called the Temple Judea Museum, and it keeps me busy because we have wonderful shows and themes, and I'm always making new work for it. This is again an instance where I have incorporated many very famous images. This is all by hand. This is not done. I haven't used any photographic images here. And if you notice, the fingers are placed like the priestly blessing. And this is Shabbos candles. I think I would like to point out that on the computer, I have created a painterly image looking like watercolors. And I actually had this printed on very fine watercolor paper, and the inks kind of bled into it, and you could not have told that it was a digital piece. Now we move on to Black Lives Matter and to what's going on in the streets of America and what I think about. I use these images. I use this very famous one of Rabbis Eisendroth and Heschel marching with Martin Luther King. And this is how I put it into the painting that I'll show you next. And this is, of course, Dr. King and how I put him into the image I'll show you. And going to the stained glass project that was mentioned in my introduction, one of the best things I've ever done in my life, with Paula Mandel, who's on this Zoom. Many times our kids have reached out and held hands and signified the togetherness that we all experience. So this is a photograph that I had taken, and this is what I incorporated it into. I called it Kindred Spirits because I think there's a similarity in goals and in how we as different peoples have been treated, maybe starting with the indigenous man here, the American Indian, and the Trail of Tears comes to mind. And then of course the Yellow Star and Dr. King and the two rabbis and poster selling Negroes. Imagine that. And that's what it all said to me as I was looking at the good people on both sides who were chanting about Jews shall not replace us. So
Joan, I just want to give you a heads up about time.
Sorry?
I just want to give you a heads up about time because we're coming up to 12. We're going to run over a little bit, but
okay.
You know.
Wait.
And there are a lot of questions.
Well, I'm just going back. I'll go quickly. These are all the pieces that I do. I have figured I've done over 200 works of art, very similar to this. Whatever hits me. This is, I'd like to point this out because this is Depression photography and the feeling of the food lines that we are now seeing in our country. And I followed with this. Again, a Depression line in the 20s, and then moms standing in line in Philadelphia now. And then one day I was struck by the Nazi-like marching in our streets, and I I illustrated Springtime for Hitler from the producers, thanks to Mel Brooks, and put the words right on it. And I made a lovely spring scene. Springtime for Hitler. Deutschland is happy and gay. We're marching to a faster pace. Look out, here comes the master race. Can you tell I'm angry? This is from photographs that I took of our kids, but it's actually hand drawn and it's from our program. And these are our kids. I take their pictures all the time. These are boys that I love, whom I am afraid for. This young man had just learned that one of his best friends was killed. So I created this, and this was from a photograph, and I drew in the dead friend. And this is a girl who I think about all the time, and she was holding a little boy. And I wonder what's going on in their heads now. So happier times when we all got together. I just showed this to our kids. We did a Zoom with all our students, and they were very excited to see themselves. And these are more pieces that I've done. I used this image here. This is a hand drawing, but this is a photograph of a piece of jewelry that I often wear with the tree of life from a friend who gave it to me many years ago. And that's it. That's me, in case you can't tell.
Wonderful, Joan. Thank you so much. And it's interesting to consider that all three artists today use collage so effectively and in such different ways. So it's really was a treat to kind of compare and contrast how you're working with that. We do have a couple questions for you, Joan.
Yes.
Julia Brucker has a question. Go ahead, Julia, unmute and ask your question.
Thank you so much for this amazing presentation. I'm curious how you install these when you put them on display. Are they just printed, or and what are you printing on?
Okay, I have printed on paper, on canvas, most recently on glass and on metal. I haven't done it myself. I've had it done. And it's really an amazing process. There are companies that do this. I recently had an exhibition where I did everything on glass.
Wonderful. And Carol Sterling has a question for you. Go ahead, Carol, unmute, please.
Carol, we can't hear you. Unmute.
Okay.
Okay.
Joan, thank you. Great presentation. Can you recommend how we might be able to learn more about the techniques you mentioned, whether there are people teaching them online or in person, and if so, where can we find them? Thank you.
Well, my best friend is Google, and there are many YouTube programs teaching about digital art. A lot of it is getting used to it. I'm always reminded of my grandmother when my grandfather came in with a television set. Yes, I'm that old. And she began screaming, "What are you doing? How dare you bring this? What is this?" That's how some people feel about working on the computer. But I'm telling you that there are lots of teaching programs on Google that can help you. And just start it. Just start.
Okay. Thanks, Joan.
Thank you. I think it is time to wrap it up. And I just want to make sure that I mention a couple more members of our Jewish Art Salon Open Studios team, Cheselyn, Amato, and Chana Elias, who helped put these programs together. And I think I may have skipped that by accident at the beginning. So Dorit, do you want to send us out with a few words about our next program?
Also the program advisor, the one and only Yona Verwer, of course. Without her, nothing is happened. Okay, thank you all the participants. It was fantastic. Joan, I didn't have a chance to talk to you about your art because there's so much to say, and it was wonderful. All of you, it was really very powerful. And thank you all the audience and coming to join us tonight. We hope to see you in our next session on January 12th. Artist presenters will be announced very soon. I wish you all a very healthy and wonderful with a lot of vaccines and whatever it comes to, let us fly again and take the mask off. Happy New Year 2021.
Happy New Year, and thanks for coming, and thank you to the artists. It was outstanding.